Hello, my name is Benjamin Hart. I'm an American attorney and the Managing Director of Integrity Legal here in Bangkok, Thailand. In this video, we're going to be talking about certain long-term visas, most notably things like the 10-year retirement visa, the so-called 4-year SMART visa, which has been proposed, and as of the time of this filming, we've yet to actually be seen implemented. And finally, the so-called 2-year visa under certain BOI schemes. So specifically what we're talking about is Thailand, especially in more recent years, has been coming up with various programs, and one I forgot to mention a moment ago is the Elite Card program. They've been coming up with various programs to provide longer term status in the kingdom to people with certain either qualifications pursuant to investing in the kingdom, or retiring in the kingdom, working with specialized skills in the kingdom, or sort of VIP status, if you will. Why are we talking about this? Well, just a brief overview of sort of the history of immigration status in the kingdom. Up until the middle 70s, an individual who came to Thailand was simply asked at the airport, do you wish to remain in Thailand as a tourist, or are you here to stay for a while? And if you said you were here to stay, they actually stamped you a permanent resident at the airport. That was actually the old regime if you go back relatively into the 70s. That regime changed in about 74, 75, and the scheme that we now are fairly used to today, the scheme that's still pretty well in effect today with some modifications, came about where you have the B visas, the O visas, these various sort of non-immigrant categories, but there was still also permanent residence. And at that time, it was still relatively straightforward. I won't use the term easy, but relatively straightforward, and arguably easier than it is now, to still get permanent residence, although you oftentimes had to show a certain level of time spent in the country, salary, all of this kind of thing. Sometime in the 80s, they also came up with work authorization, aka work permits. We're not going to go into that specifically here. What I'm trying to provide is a history as to how this is evolving and why it's evolving the way it is. Well, so there was this non-immigrant visa, and then there was a fairly straightforward methodology by way of changing from a non-immigrant status over into permanent residence. And special branch police used to have jurisdiction with respect to permanent resident adjudications here in Thailand, and then later those adjudications were moved over to the immigration police directly. The reason, again, I'm bringing this up is to show that over time, for lack of a better term, the bureaucracy is accreted in such a way, and the number of people that were wanting to live in Thailand long term has pretty well exponentially increased over the years, to the point where, one, the backlogs and the quotas with respect to permanent residents are such that, and the requirements associated therewith and the process is such that it's kind of prohibitive to many individuals who want to become a PR. You can check out information specific to Thai permanent residents in another video on this channel. But what I'm trying to sort of explain here is it's relatively straightforward to become a non-immigrant and do the renewal process on a yearly basis, renew one's work permit, and go through that process. It's not quite so easy to, and not quite so straightforward to transition into Thai permanent residence. It's actually quite a time-consuming, relatively frustrating and document-intensive process. And that's not to say anything about anyone involved with the process. It's simply the way it's evolved, and it's simply the way the system works. I think what Thai immigration officials are trying to do, is create something akin to a middle ground here. They're basically trying to go ahead and say, look, we understand this non-immigrant system. It's not very effective at dealing with our more long-term visa holders who are actually more or less working and creating a tax base here in Thailand, generating revenue in the form of taxes here in Thailand. And I think that the authorities are looking at ways in which to go ahead and try to move some of those folks into a more permanent status that isn't quite permanent residence per se, but is not as day-to-day sort of almost transitory as the current system or as the normal system with respect to always having to renew every year, the 90-day check-ins, etc. So you've seen things like the 10-year retirement visa, which we discuss a recent update on that in another video on this channel. The 10-year retirement visa was created for those. I mean, I think it's created for two reasons. One, if you're willing to bring in a more substantial amount of money and sort of park it in Thailand, then the immigration authorities are willing to provide quite longer term status in terms of a 10-year visa that's created in 2 partitions of 5 years. They've created that structure to go ahead and sort of provide consideration for the folks that are willing to park a significant, I won't call it an investment, but significant capital in the kingdom in which to retire with. Another thing, like the elite card, if one is willing to pay $500,000 baht, just pay into the elite program for the elite benefits. One of the benefits is a 5-year visa. Another thing that's just recently been announced, although implementation is yet to be seen, is the 4-year smart visa for professionals and investors in certain industries here in the kingdom. That, I think, has been designed for those who are willing to bring in and invest significant amounts of not only capital, but resources in terms of intellectual property resources, technological exchange, etc. Certain consideration is probably going to be given for that in the form of these longer-term visas. Finally, there's the BOI, which there are, in certain very narrow subsets of circumstances, instances where you're going to see 2-year visas being issued and 2-year work permits being issued, as opposed to the standard 1-year visa, 1-year work permit issuance. And again, the reason for this is, generally speaking, BOI companies are subject to actually substantially more scrutiny under most circumstances than just a so-called SME, small company. Generally speaking, again, BOI companies are granted that status because the individuals involved with them are bringing in substantial resources with respect to investment and often technological exchange. The thing that I want to impart, though, as closing out this video, is the notion that these are not particularly widely available visas across the board. The elite program and the 10-year retirement visa have significant financial obligations associated with approval of such visas. The 4-year smart visa, as proposed, although not yet implemented, it seems to me like it's going to be very similar to the 2-year BOI, where, look, the folks that have gone through the process of getting a BOI certification have had to be extremely scrutinized by the Board of Investment, and moreover, the Board of Investment generally has to specifically provide for those 2-year visa benefits, and we're generally talking about pretty significant going concerns. These are not small businesses that are getting these kind of longer-term visas issued. So folks that are doing things like F&B and sort of a, food and beverage and sort of a smaller, restaurant, small business, something like this, small consultants, small, trading companies, things like this, retail companies, small, again, SMEs, small to medium size. And medium size can get fairly big. It's not to say that these companies are small in an absolute sense, but more in sort of a relative sense. And it should be noted that, again, although these visa options are becoming more available, there are certain costs associated with them, and they're not just sort of handed out in a general way. They're generally, in my opinion, especially the smart card, the smart visa, which we've yet to see it fully implemented, it's my opinion that we're going to see that, and it's going to be implemented in such a way that it's going to only be a narrow subset of people that are going to be eligible for it, but it's going to be a fairly significant benefit to those who can actually get that immigration status.